Right, so I've explained that there seemed to be some confusion about this deadline of the 28th of September. The 28th of September is the deadline for submitting your project proposal. Um, that isn't week 6. Elsewhere in the materials it says week 6. I think we have to say that that's a little misleading, but the actual deadline is the one at the submission point and the one in the assignment brief, which is the 28th of September. So at the time I'm recording this, that's 7 days away. Now, I hope that that's plenty of time to produce the proposal, which is a short document, only 500 words long, but an important one. So, let's just say a few things about the project. Let me remind you that the idea is that you will become an expert, really, in the subject that you're studying during the year on the project. So it's therefore very important that you choose a project that you will enjoy, something which motivates you. And it's also important that you start immediately and then work steadily throughout the year. So a certain amount of time management is involved in making a good job of the project. There are certain requirements, certainly things that we'll be looking for when we're marking a project, such as we would be looking to see that you have learned something new, that you have perhaps built on things that you've learned from other modules. So we'll have covered design methods, databases, programming. So you may undertake a project that involves you developing a database using a design method. So you're certainly applying things that you've already learned, but applying them to a new problem, and perhaps a bigger problem than you've been asked to consider before, is evidence that you've learned something new. You've learned how to apply these techniques on something that is a more realistic, like a real world type of problem. They're meant to be, a part of the project is this idea that it's an independent piece of work. So one of the things that is being assessed is your ability to work independently. So you have a lot of responsibility there for managing your time, and although you'll have advice and support, to a certain extent this is different from other modules in that you'll be working on something that is different from what other students on the course with you are studying at the same time. So there are these questions to be considered in producing a good proposal. Why are you doing the project? Why have you come up with this idea? It has to be an attempt to solve a problem. They have to be able to just explain simply what that problem is. It could be that the problem is that there isn't a game of a particular kind and you want to design that game. That still counts as a problem. So it could also be a design for something, not an actual software product, but a design for a software product, or it could be a research exercise leading to a written report. But you have to be clear what it is that you're producing. So is it a piece of software, or is it a design, perhaps with a prototype of a software product, or is it a research paper? From the outset, you have to be very clear what it is that you're producing, what the product is, and for whom are you producing that product? Who are the people who will make use of this product to solve some kind of problem? They could be real people or imaginary people. Now, in the chat room, we were considering this idea of whether the client had to be real. No, it doesn't. So it's possible to say I'm designing a piece of software here for a teacher, but not to have an actual teacher in mind. If you have an actual client, someone that you can work with, that can be beneficial, provided that it's a good, reliable relationship. I have been involved with projects in the past where a real client simply loses interest or changes their mind or becomes ill or leaves the country or something, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where you are dependent upon working with them. But if you have a client as a real person with a real need, you have a reliable relationship with them, that can be very useful. It gives it a very clear focus, and it helps at the evaluation at the end, because after all, if you have the client saying that the product is very useful to them, that's a very good piece of evaluation. Anyway, this business of writing the proposal. It's a short description. So I'd advise you to focus on a couple of things first of all. First of all, simply try to write a short description of the background to your project, what the aims and objectives of the project are, why you think it's an interesting idea, why it's worthy of study, and what you think might be the most difficult challenges that you would face, and how you see the project relating to the course that you've been studying. Then you can be clearer about exactly what the product is. Is it a piece of working software? Is it a system specification? May you have used the unified modeling language, for example, or entity relationship modeling or something to come up with a design for a system? If you've done a design, are you also going to produce wireframes or prototype interfaces to support that design? Is it a research report? So the product could actually be a report. So in that case, you'd have had to identify an area in computing that is worth researching and a client who would be interested in reading the report that you would produce. So who are those people? Who are the people who would find the product useful? And you should identify those clearly. You need to be clear about the areas that you need to research, and there's this thing about the project being academically worthy, which means you have to have an idea of what academically worthy research consists of. And that's somewhat different from practical matters like building a piece of software. Now, I'll just say something about this idea of academic research. I don't know if you've used Google Scholar, but if you go into Google Scholar on the internet, type in a query, this is the kind of thing that you see. Right, so I've picked the query happiness here, and here, is what I would be presented with. So I've changed this query now, so it's not just happiness, it's about happiness, but also neuroscience and chocolate. And that makes the search much more narrow, far fewer results, because I've introduced the additional keywords, and also because I've introduced that Boolean connective, the word and, which means only documents that have been indexed under those three words will be retrieved. Happiness, neuroscience, and chocolate. It's a much more specific query than the previous one. So if this is a better statement of what I'm looking for, then I should have used it right from the beginning, because there's far more, the likelihood that these documents here are going to be of use to me is much greater than it would have been with a simple query like just the word happiness. Now, these are the titles of the things that have been retrieved, and each of these is an academically worthy source, something you could cite in a bibliography. These are the authors. These are the reference details where you could find the publication. These are not the abstract or the contents of the papers, but a snippet that has been constructed by Google to summarize the content of the paper. This is information about how heavily cited the paper has been. So this is how many people have included this paper in their bibliography. So you see the top one here has been cited 363 times. That tells you something about the paper, that it's attracted a certain amount of attention. The second one has only been cited 4 times. So that number is perhaps giving you a clue that the first paper might be one that is more significant, that it's attracted more attention. So that might be the first one to read. There are also links to articles that are related to this one. So if you found that particularly useful, you could have a look at these related articles. And of course, on Google Scholar, there are links to the actual full text of the papers. Often you can download a PDF file and study it away from the computer. So I'll just go back to that for a second. Think about this. If you're a person who is employed as a programmer working for a software house, you would not be writing reports in which you cited academic references, such as the ones that you would find in Google Scholar. You just wouldn't do it. You'd write the program, and that would be that. But this is an academic piece of work. So you have to demonstrate that you've done your background reading, and that your background reading has been of suitably scholarly material. So you do need a bibliography, and that, if you like, is a key difference between an academic piece of work and a practical piece of work. The practical pieces of work are the kinds of thing that you would do after you've graduated, when you're working as a software developer, for example. And the academic side of it is you explaining in detail why you would be doing such a thing. People working in software houses don't write academic reports about the work that they've done. Another thing that you should consider is what development method you will be following. Now, I presume you will have heard of these various different development methods. And once you've made a decision to use one of these, then it has implications on your plan. So if you decided, for example, to follow the waterfall model, which under certain circumstances is perfectly acceptable, if you're pretty clear that the requirements that get specified at the beginning will not change, you can follow the waterfall model and say, I've finished requirements, elicitation, now I'm moving into design. I've finished with design, I'm moving into implementation. I've finished with implementation, I'm moving into verification testing. Yeah, so you can see that gives you a plan. The requirements is going to be like use case models, perhaps design, maybe entity relationship models, that kind of thing. Implementation, you actually implement, say, a database, and then testing. So you could begin in the proposal to make a plan that is your current estimate of how much time you would need to spend in each of those phases. Then if that plan looks realistic to me, I'll be able to say this is a realistic proposal. It seems that you won't have any difficulty making a good job of the project in the time that's available. So a couple of example projects. Now this is a bit tricky because there's enormous flexibility about the projects that you choose. These are projects that I've supervised in the past, and they're not necessarily the type of thing that you'd be interested in, but I thought it would be useful to give a couple of examples. So, if you have problems with a software system, you need to report them to a help desk from your mobile phone. Wouldn't it be useful if there was an app that allows you to do that? That's quite an interesting design problem. Would it, for example, access a database of commonly occurring problems so that you could instead of typing in the problem, you could select it from a list. You know, the kinds of thing that could be. So it's a prototype of an application that would be used on a mobile to report internet problems. It could also apply, couldn't it, to hardware issues in labs, that kind of thing. So that's a clear idea, isn't it? It's clear what the product is. It's sort of clear what who the client would be for that. Seems realistic, especially if you back off from saying that you'll actually implement an app that could be a commercial product. If you say that you'll produce a prototype, that's very realistic. This was, I don't know about this one. I didn't actually supervise this project, but I was interested in it. So I don't know if this is true, but the suggestion is that sometimes if you're betting, which I would encourage you not to do, but if you're betting on the outcome of a football match or something, sometimes the bookmakers who take the bets get the odds wrong. And apparently you can sometimes tell that they've done that because the actual more realistic odds are available from a different source. So this person was writing a piece of software that would look for opportunities to identify a situation where the bookmakers had got it wrong and there was a real possibility of making some money on a bet. And the next stage in this process, I suppose, would be to have the computer automatically play the bet for you. But I would be very reluctant to trust a piece of software like that. But it's an interesting problem, isn't it? You know, you can see what the problem is. It's a complicated one. You can see who the client is, and you can imagine that this is going to be the main thing about this project is going to be the algorithm, the logic of working out where there's a disparity, and then some kind of program that shows the feasibility of the idea. I would again be very surprised if anyone doing a project like this produced a product that could actually be used. We wouldn't expect you to be able to do that in the time that you have. A note-taking website, so simply a way of making notes and then storing them, and then some sort of encryption being dealt with. This was something done in JavaScript on a web-based mobile kind of application, and the key thing that made it interesting was using encryption, which was the new skill that was being developed. And you can see that there's a problem there, taking notes, but they have to be confidential. Maybe you're a journalist or something and you're taking notes during an interview with someone, and you must make sure that those are kept confidential. Well, it's okay because this application encrypts the information. Again, you can see what the research would be, can't you? You can see what the research would be. It'd be into client-side encryption algorithms and things that could be coded in JavaScript and what have you. Practical one here, a landlord property manager back in 2016. So an application that would allow someone who owns houses that are rented out to students in this case. So it's a database and application with a web front end, and what we're doing is providing the landlord with an application to monitor information about the various properties that they own, who's living in them, who's paid their rent, that kind of thing. So again, you can see, can't you, what the product is there. You can see who the client is there, and you can imagine producing at least a prototype that shows what the interface would look like to a system like that. And you'd probably also produce a database design, maybe even implement the database and show some functionality, some of the data access functionality that would be needed. Here's a more theoretical research one. This is a project that was to do with the idea that people increasingly, when they're watching television, have an iPad, or well, not necessarily an iPad, maybe a mobile phone or some other tablet, in front of them or their laptop on their lap. And while they're watching a television program, they're actually commenting on it on Twitter or something or some other social media. And other people who are also watching the program in other houses are also commenting. So that's quite an interesting sociological thing, you know, and psychologists write a lot about this type of thing. How does that change the experience of watching television? The fact that you're involved in discussing what you're watching with people through social media. That's a kind of research-based thing where the product is going to be a research paper. Now, what you have to do is have a good look at this document. It says that the submission deadline is the 28th of September, that this piece of coursework is worth just 10%, but very important to get this done well. If you submit by that deadline, by the 28th of September, that gives me plenty of time to look through the work that has been submitted in the before we get to week 6, which is the point at which we stop having lectures each week. So have a look at that. That gives you, I think what I've said in this presentation is the kinds of things you need to have been clear about, what the problem is, who the client is, what the research, that it's a researchable topic, that you've got some kind of plan, and then you'll see how you put that together in the proposal in this document. So I may make a separate video where I go through that document with you, but for now I'm just going to say a few final words over this slide, and really this is to do with what would happen next. Having produced the proposal, we would then expect you to move on to specifying in some detail what the functional requirements are of the products that you're producing. Now, it's easier to understand this if the product is a piece of software. What the functional requirements of software are is normally described in a use case diagram, and that use case diagram will come in useful for testing the software later on. So that would be the next topic I would want to spend some time talking about. It's really the other side of the proposal when you're beginning to produce that interim report. Right, so I'll end this presentation there and wish you the best of luck with developing your project proposal, and I look forward to reading them. Thank you for your time and attention.